everyone, welcome to Zunan Canada. I'm your host, Jesse Betteridge. Joining me today, for the first time ever, from the Toonami Faithful Podcast is Sketch. Sketch, could you just give a quick introduction to yourself?
Oh, hi, yeah, I'm Sketch. I host the Toonami Faithful Podcast. I am at least in writing the editor-in-chief of that website, but I definitely don't do all those duties lately. I'm namely throw that off to my man CJ, who's really good at looking at other people's articles. So I've known these guys, in passing at least, for many, many years, from back in the old Toon Zone forum days.
I believe you mean anime superhero?
Yes, these are my anime superhero cohorts.
We met one fateful SakuraCon at the Funimation table.
Yes.
I think there's a photo of me autographing a CD and you two are hanging around.
It captured the dynamic of that era well.
Yeah.
And of course, joining again is Karl Olsen.
Hi, everybody. It's Karl, aka Ultraclystron, Nerdcore guy, and also a very intermittent writer for Toon Zone, anime superhero, whatever. I think the last thing I had published was a big write-up I did on the first episode of Fully Cooley Alternative. And then I pitched doing a much more comprehensive write-up on Progressive, and that I just self-published it instead. DeMarco liked it, though. So
he did. And we have all gathered here today for a very notable event, and that is the launch of the world's first 24/7 Adult Swim channel in Canada. But what's more significant is the fact that this is the first time ever, really, that the Adult Swim brand is being taken seriously in Canada. This new channel is indeed being run by Corus, who runs Teletoon and YTV and ran Cartoon Network Canada and the old Adult Swim Canada on that network as well. And now they have the whole catalog for the first time, which is very significant. And in the press release they put out, they expressed an intent on mirroring the U.S. network. A very notable and also notably vague commitment, but it's that's something worth paying attention to, nonetheless.
Yeah.
The station did launch on April 1st, and it actually was supposed to launch at 6 a.m. on that day, and they took us by total surprise and coordinated with the U.S. Adult Swim on their annual April Fool's joke, which I've got to say, not only did I not expect that, I did not think they were even capable of doing something like that. The station launched 6 hours early, and they ran the entire 6 hours of Game Seto Machu Picchu.
It's nuts, but I also have to say that's the highest effort April Fools they've done in forever. Because it is literally
they dropped the whole show.
They dropped the whole show. Yeah, it's 4.5 hours. It's like a proper anime season that they just marathon through. That is not the worth.
Yeah,
it's nuts. It's like AC Boo did Perfect Hair. That's how I feel it is.
It's very similar.
That's how parts of it feel. Other parts of it absolutely feel like The External World by the guy who did that episode of the 3D episode of Adventure Time. It feels a lot like David O'Reilly's work at points as well, especially the hyper backstory parts. Really ape his stuff.
It's also notable because, it shows right from the get-go, or at least right from the get-go for the Canadian version, that anime is a very important part of the Adult Swim brand. Some people still insist that there's a firm separation between the Toonami stuff and the other stuff. I don't agree. I think it is very much baked in, and they even ran, they had some of the promos and bumpers from Adult Swim. I don't know if those were completely in sync with the U.S. broadcast, but they showed that One Punch Man How to Get an Anime Body card, which shows One Punch Man in it during the April Fool's program, which, at least the fact that they wouldn't go out and remove something like that, something featuring a show that they definitely don't have the rights to, is notable, for sure. And also it shows, again, reinforces this idea that anime is a strong fixture in the Adult Swim brand. Of course, the April Fool's joke.
You should be happy because it means at some point you're probably going to get to see the room on Adult Swim Canada. That's got to happen at some point. That's great news for you.
Yeah. a 10-year anniversary of the Room appearing on Adult Swim for the first time, apparently.
Wow.
This year. Yeah. And also, Adult Swim Canada has taken the place of the Action Channel, which was owned by Corus, originally owned by Shaw, originally owned by Elias Atlantis, originally Showcase Action. And one great thing during the April Fool's gag is that it still had the action bug in the lower right-hand corner, but it was like slowly morphing into the Adult Swim bug, which, again, like...
That's attention to detail.
That means they took it even a step further than what was going on in the U.S. at the time. So, like, for that 6-hour period, they totally nailed it. Everything after that, I can't quite say the same. But before we get into detail on the Adult Swim Canada, I just wanted to point out this episode was supposed to be originally about the launch of WoW World, which we knew absolutely for sure, without any doubt whatsoever, was going to launch on April 1st, 2019. Well, guess what?
April Fools.
I don't even understand what happened. Apparently they have been able to, like...
I wonder if they like saw AS24 coming and they're like, oh, we don't want to launch against that.
It could be. Maybe there's some, competitive vibes going through, because word is that WoW World, an important part of it, is supposed to be a millennial targeted lineup.
And part of what WoW is grabbing from is from Verve Library, right? So that's another thing that's like already a bit weird, where you're just like, hey, we're gonna grab from a library. Oh, who owns this library? Oh, the same people who own Adult Swim.
Yeah, it's
like that. I wonder if the AT&T merger just suddenly threw some brakes on things.
It's possible. Also, it's very possible that a lot of the legal stuff is not going to be. With that stuff, it's not going to be as cut and dried in Canada as it is in the U.S.
Well, there's a lot of existing contracts that are going to be. It's one of those things where you get to see like, how does AT&T view these things going forward, and Canada's caught in the middle of that.
Yeah, exactly. Our highly protected media ecosystem is kind of throws a wrench in things, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. But nonetheless, WoW World has been delayed. Based on the release that they put out, I'm not really clear on when they will be able to launch it. It seems that it could be anywhere between June and the end of August, so basically sometime during the summer. I would expect it to be at the latter half of that period, considering that they actually have not officially confirmed the name of the channel yet. It's just been we've just kind of basically assumed that it's WoW World, because that's how all the stuff on Crave has been branded. So there's basically no other news on that, at least nothing that has been announced publicly. So there's really nothing we can talk about. If you are looking for any scrap of information you can find on WoW World, you are welcome to check out the 329-page discussion forum thread at the Kanzenshu forums on the Ocean dub of Dragon Ball Z Kai, also known as Ocean Kai, a show that is speculated that WoW World is going to be looking into. That forum thread, it spans about 9 years, and I guarantee you that reading through it is, at the very least, more entertaining than watching Dragon Ball GT. I can guarantee that.
Low bar to clear, but
you want to go on the real Grand Tour, go check out that 329-page Kanzenshu thread on Ocean Kai. It is something. It is epic. It really is. And after all that, we still really don't know anything about this thing.
Yeah.
This weird dub. Maybe something will come of it. I don't know. We'll see. This is too bad, though, because I was really hoping that WoW World would launch in time along with a lineup on the Crave service, and could have been a home to One Punch Man Season 2, which I have to note, at the time of this recording, there is still no news on whether or not that simulcast is going to be available in Canada. And if I'm not mistaken, that is pretty much the most high-profile simulcast title that has ever happened that is not available in Canada at all. But we also have to look at what happened with One Punch Man Season 1. It was a quote-unquote Hulu exclusive, but Daisuke covered the international streaming for that, and there is no Daisuke equivalent in this situation now. And I think there is a streaming partner figured out for Australia, and a couple other regions, not Canada, not the UK. It's a big question mark right now.
And like the UK is a big gap.
Yeah. It really is, and
Like-
we're looking at a situation right now where it seems Viz actually may have gotten the international rights and have just neglected to make it international in any way whatsoever.
Viz boning Canada. Whenever does that happen?
Yeah, I mean this is worse than usual because this is the first time that there hasn't been some kind of backup that has revealed itself. And now, granted, it's still possible in the next day something might be announced. Something could pop up after the first episode is already premiered. Based on the quality of the material released so far for One Punch Man Season 1, I think...
Or Season 2, you mean?
Season 2, might be a little bit of a drop-off after Season 1.
Nothing of value was lost.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to resign it to that. I think it still really sucks that such a high-profile title is being shafted, and it's worth noting that,
It just hurts seeing it after, that pitch-perfect run for Mob Season 2.
It's worth noting that, nerds like us, obviously, are not satisfied with the quality that they're putting out for Season 2, but One Punch Man is a major mainstream title, and, the show's more mainstream audience, the guys you overhear in the locker room just randomly talking about One Punch Man, they're not going to care about that stuff as much. And yes, just to confirm, that is what guys actually talk about in locker rooms, One Punch Man. I can confirm this myself.
Why are you in locker rooms? You're 30.
And Jim.
Jim. Ah, you're right.
Yeah.
What's a gaim? Oh.
But yeah, big question mark about what's going to happen there. Again, shows how we really need a streaming company up here that has a partnership with Viz, but still hasn't happened yet, and we could be just waiting for disappointment on all that. Hard to say, but that's, again, not what we're talking about today for the most part. It's going to be on Adult Swim Canada, so I have to point out that the launch of Adult Swim Canada, it not only marked ending the Adult Swim Canada block on Cartoon Network Canada, maybe the most significant thing that's happened here, from a historical perspective at least. Teletoon has now dropped all of their adult programming and has become a dedicated 24/7 kids network for the first time in its entire 22-year history. If you weren't aware, since Teletoon launched in 1997, it was not a children's channel, it never was. It launched as a animation channel that would equally target children, families, and adults. And it had always segmented its programming that way from day one. And converting over to a full kids network is actually quite a drastic change for that network. I know Adult Swim launched in 2002. Teletoon had them beat at having a proper adult block by a solid 5 years. And
yeah, because I think even Midnight Run isn't until, 2000?
Yeah.
1999?
Yeah, I guess the Midnight Run would have been the closest thing before that.
TVPG, they can say damn on Gundam. Meanwhile, Candace
and there can be a little bit of blood.
I always found it kind of funny that this idea of Cartoon Network, having an adult block at night or having anything adult targeted at night was unthinkable, or there was this big question of, can they get away with this or can they do this? But Teletoon had already been doing it for years. In fact, they were the first English language animation channel that had a block for kids during the day and adults at night. Maybe that was the case in other languages. I think there might have been something in France.
I would imagine, I can't remember when Animax launched, but it would probably technically fit that bill, as would Kid Station.
Yeah. That's true. But again, that
ain't here.
That ain't here. Yeah.
I think Teletoon also benefited immensely from the fact that Canadian cable was always a little bit more chill about stuff. Old Showcase was wild. So
oh yeah,
it was really easy for them to be like, why are you going to complain about us having Gundam with Dam? They're over on Showcase, there's a guy getting whipped by a dominatrix. Chill.
This was the early age of Showcase and Bravo. So Teletoon was very much
Canadian Bravo being way different than American Bravo.
Right. Well, back
for
then.
context.
Back then.
Yeah.
It's all reality shows now. But back then, it was a very different time. Teletoon was very much keeping up with the Joneses when it came to the adult content they ran at night, or at least they tried to. Without a true American equivalent, they were kind of grasping at straws a lot of the time when they first launched.
Well, and that was kind of while there was that boom of all the Simpsons writers got their own shows kind of shit in the U.S. It was before that kind of.
It was a little before that, though.
Yeah. So there wasn't even that content to sort of say like, let's fill it time with like reruns of something. It's like reruns of what? What are you going to license?
They had the Highlander animated series and the USA Network animated adaptation of Savage Dragon.
Well, and USA Network also ran the Highlander animated series. Yeah. Like that was a USA Network.
That's probably how they got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Package deals.
Yeah, so they picked that stuff up and just threw it in the adult block because they didn't know where else to put it, pretty much. But it did have some legitimately adult content. They had Duckman. They had Pond Life from the UK.
There's another USA pickup.
That
USA just kept they just probably kept getting stuff from USA.
Yeah, but they got Pond Life from the UK. They got the Lolita shorts from France. Both shows that had actual nudity in them. That also highlights another important thing from the very beginning for their adult lineups. Everything they showed was uncensored, or at least if it was censored, that's how they received it. From the very beginning of the channel to the end of adult content on Teletoon, to also Adult Swim Canada and the other related spin-offs and stuff, one constant trend was that they would never censor anything in-house, whether it was an anime, whether it was imported US stuff, whether it was imported European stuff, whether it was a live-action movie. They even showed like 300 back when they were doing live action movies. They showed that movie uncensored, among a few other things. So
Canada has way more chill rules on this stuff, and damn did it show there.
Yeah, if you're looking at Adult Swim and Teletoon's adult stuff, just in terms of what they were able to get away with on the air, Teletoon was definitely the reigning champion by a significant margin. Not censoring stuff isn't always something to brag about, though. We just have to look at what's going on with Sword Art Online recently on Adult Swim, and it shows that censoring stuff not always a terrible idea.
I mean, this is that background question. Is like, imagine they'll finally launch anime on Adult Swim Canada, and they're like Shield Hero uncut, and you're just like, fuck.
Yeah, Goblin Slayer for everyone.
Prison School.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's at least funny, but
that wouldn't be a bad choice. I would be totally okay with them running Prison School. That would be a good fit, actually.
That would be pretty. Like, if you're gonna run something exploitative, go for it.
Yeah, and back in these early years, they had really great bumpers for each segment of the day. You can find them on YouTube. I recommend checking them out. They had these really kind of creepy claymation ones for the adult hours. I always really liked them. Teletoon really had a strong brand and identity and voice back in their earliest days. Yeah. That branding went away around 99, though, and was replaced with something much blander and more boring and much lower
cheaper
budget, which was always really unfortunate. But in addition to all that other content they had, this was also the time at their launch when Teletoon made, to this day, its biggest push for adult-targeted anime, when they were running several major anime titles from Manga Entertainment, like Macross Plus, Wings of Hanaemis, Ninja Scroll, and Pat Labor 1 and 2, which were awesome pickups, but unfortunately...
Uncut Ninja Scroll on
Uncut
cable.
Ninja Scroll, yeah.
Imagine.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the acquisitions they got never went beyond that. They ran those programs over and over again for several years. Why they never tried to get anything else, even from Manga Entertainment, is not clear. But also when they transitioned to their unbranded lineup, they integrated other premium US shows. They had Spawn, they had Spicy City. They were very inconsistent in those days, but they were definitely very experimental. I think that was really cool, even if the lineup as a whole doesn't really hold up when you look at it historically. In 2000, they changed it over to Teletoon Unleashed, and that really thrived entirely off of, semi-CanCon productions that were picked up from MTV, like Undergrads and Clone High. Undergrads, having been run into the ground so incessantly that we have an entire
running well into like 2010 for context, 2011.
Yeah. If that Undergrads movie actually happens, you have Teletoon to blame for it, because they just conditioned an entire generation of people to be nostalgic for that show for some reason.
I want it. Give it to me.
Okay, Sketch. Interestingly, one of the characters in Undergrads, Roscoe, they actually redubbed his voice with a Canadian actor so that it would fulfill Canadian content obligations as well. The version that ran in Canada, the version that ran in Canada was different from the version that ran in the States.
Oh, that means if it ever goes up on streaming, it'll need 2 English language tracks.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I know in the US version, the creator did the voices for all the principal characters, but then the Canadian version, it's everyone except Roscoe, who has this other Canadian actor doing his voice. In addition to those shows, they also had, failed US network pickups that had, again, the Simpsons DNA that Karl mentioned, like the Oblongs and Mission Hill. And also, some show called Family Guy as well, which actually debuted on Teletoon.
Oh, the Disney show?
Yeah, that obscure title called the Disney Archives. But it debuted on Teletoon around the same time that Adult Swim launched in the US in 2002, which was almost a solid 2 years before it was even thinkable for Adult Swim to pick up something so crude. Now, Teletoon had another block called The Detour. At that time, it was a quote-unquote teen block, hour-long teen block that had just random CanCon stuff in it. I think the longest running shows in it were Cyber 6 and The Ripping Friends, which ran over and over again during the original Detour. But in 2004, The Detour and Teletoon Unleashed were merged together to create The Detour on Teletoon. And this is the version of the block that I think most people will be forever familiar with, because it is featured in an unskippable ad at the front of the Clone High DVD set, which I know a lot of people own. I was looking back in that old schedule. I gotta say, a lot of Teletoon Unleashed lineup was basically, it was Family Guy, Futurama, home movies, and then they would run like Ren and Stimpy late at night. It was a pretty barren schedule, but if you're going back to that time, like reruns of shows like Futurama and Family Guy were pretty highly valuable.
They were licensed to print money. Like they were guaranteed ratings magnets, and they had to do very little additional effort to procure them.
But here's the thing, like that's how it wound up being. Yeah. But they didn't go into them knowing they'd be a surefire hit.
Yeah, but they were probably easy to pick up.
This was before the shows were revived, so you would really appreciate seeing Family Guy and Futurama back on the air, because it didn't seem like you were ever going to come back, or
all we'll ever be able to do is watch them on cable. We'll never even be able to buy them on DVD later.
I mean, that was the mentality at one point.
Yeah, that's the early O's.
I mean, these were highly valued properties, and that's kind of, that's where their current success sprang from. And they also had some very bad CanCon shows, like Delta State, which is a very boring rotoscoped show that would have been more interesting if they didn't rotoscope it. And Sons of Butcher, Station X, or Clip Show the Series, as I like to call it. And also Bromwell High, which is a UK co-production, which at the time I thought was their worst show ever. But they would definitely sink lower than that in some of the later years. But around 2006, I think it was, they launched a mini block within the Detour called F Night. And the key thing about F Night was that for the first time, it showed a really strong push for Adult Swim content. In the few years before that, it had taken them a really long time to get anything from Adult Swim. They did pick up Harvey Birdman and Aqua Teen Hunger Force, but, as with, I know that in the States those shows got rerun over and over again in their early episodes because there were so many production problems. That was even worse in Canada because they couldn't even get all the episodes that Adult Swim had. And the repeats got really agonizing. And they also had a real fundamental misunderstanding of just how to handle those properties. I recall back when they picked up Harvey Birdman, their PR team at the time said that the reason that they picked that as the first Adult Swim show was because they thought that people would be nostalgic for the characters from Birdman, which, just shows that they just do not understand the appeal of this stuff at all. And in many ways, that kind of misunderstanding has persisted until recently. I think they've finally gotten over that, but I'd say pretty recently they still didn't get it. But with F Night, they just kind of threw the stuff on the air, hope for the best, and without trying to interpret it or understand it. They had some shoddy marketing, and they ran episodes out of order, which was really bad for stuff like Frisky Dingo. But I think that period was the peak of adult programming on Teletoon. It wasn't as experimental as their earlier days, but it was more consistent and more audience-pleasing overall. And this was also the same time that Bionics was running on YTV. So you'd have the anime from Adult Swim on YTV, and then all the original productions from Adult Swim on Teletoon at the same time, which was, not great, but again, the content was there. It was like everyone was well served, and it was good. But that all kind of came to an end in 2007 when the live-action movies started. F Night was replaced with a block for movies. Originally, it was stated that the live-action movies they would run would all have some kind of specific tie-in with animation, like they ran The Matrix because it was tied to the Animatrix, which they had already run. But that pretense ended very quickly, and they just started kind of running whatever the hell they wanted. It wasn't all bad. They ran Pan's Labyrinth, of all things. A weird choice. They also ran Akira, and also a couple other anime movies, including Armitage. This was the one time when they kind of experimented with anime again, and Akira did well because they ran that movie a lot. But unfortunately, they still never jumped into just running proper series. That block eventually evolved into Teletoon at Night, which, had as its basis was, these live-action movies, Fox Network shows. It was like an inverted Adult Swim aesthetic. They had black text on white instead of white text on black. But that's kind of where the similarities ended. They had live-action segments hosted by radio hosts from Toronto, Fearless Fred, and Sam Meggs as well. Their biggest thing was really the simulcast premieres of Archer, which they managed to secure, which still go on to this day because Archer is on the new Adult Swim Canada channel.
Another fine Disney property. I'm going to bring that up every time because I think it will play into things going forward for both channels.
It is well worth
US
repeating.
Canadian channel.
Teletoon launched Cartoon Network Canada in 2012, and along with it was Adult Swim Canada as a late-night block. But unfortunately, they managed to get a few titles, but the library was lacking, and that was mostly because G4 Canada had picked up a bunch of the Adult Swim titles after Teletoon had dropped them a few years back. They started their own adult digital distraction block, which unfortunately was short-lived. Someone complained to the CRTC, and they had to remove it because it strayed too far from their license objectives. But they still sat on the library, which made it unavailable when Cartoon Network Canada launched Adult Swim Canada. And apparently the plan was to fix that and get the library and get everything straightened out eventually. But then Teletoon was acquired by Corus, the same company that owns YTV, and that whole thing kind of went down the toilet. In 2015, Adult Swim Canada expanded its reach. Now we're getting into the stuff that happened since I launched this podcast. We've had previous episodes about. They tried to expand Adult Swim, and they made the promise that the block was going to do something worthwhile and started hyping it up. But then it turned out they still didn't have any of that catalog content. And they had plans to actually axe Teletoon at Night and move everything over to Adult Swim, but they decided not to at the last minute. And ever since then, both Adult Swim Canada and Teletoon at Night have just kind of been in stasis. Teletoon at Night has been basically live-action movies, and even the content they had apart from Archer was just kind of run in marathons. That all ended last month when Teletoon at Night finally, formally came to an end, and that big, long legacy I just listed has come to a close. I should note, though, that this only applies to the English language version of Teletoon. On the French version of Teletoon La Nuit, is still going strong. In fact, it's a more substantial cultural institution for the French-speaking audience than the English version has ever been. I don't think I'd be exaggerating if I said it was bigger than Adult Swim is in the state in that regard. But Adult Swim Canada. In early March, a lot of the promotional materials started leaking out, and they even engaged in some guerrilla marketing. Young and Dundas, I think, they had a billboard up that says this is the billboard Ashley was talking about. The joke is that you would contact them about what's happening with Adult Swim Canada, and their publicist, Ashley, would tell you to look at the billboard, which is, not as elaborate as a typical Adult Swim guerrilla strategy, but it was the closest they had ever gotten to this point, I would say.
Because it's meta and smartass, that's pretty Adult Swim. I feel like it wouldn't be out of place to see a billboard that said, this is the billboard Jason or Lazo or somebody asked about. I could absolutely see them doing the exact same bit in the States about something.
Except they'd be in multiple cities and...
yeah, but I mean, that's AT&T money.
Have you guys actually been able to see any of this station at all?
I've been obviously aggressively looking over the schedule for the next month. And it's interesting. Like, it's interesting that, like, during the preview period, they specifically don't have any garbage on it. And then the second that ends, they're like, time to run Stonados and RoboShark at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning.
Hey, those
Like,
are partial
chill.
CanCon. So if they have to run movies and they have to run CanCon, it's two birds with one stone.
It makes perfect sense, and it is kind of like, I feel like if Adult Swim's good, like, I mean, the flip side is they also have stuff that just, like, straight up, like, Mean Girls and, like, other regular-ass movies.
Yeah, I noticed
Nacho
Mean Girls
Libre.
on that schedule, and I was like, what?
I mean, they're good. I mean, like, the thing is, the comedies that they have on there that are actual proper comedies are good ones, and then they have some things that are, like, so ridiculously bad that I'm like, you know, it's kind of smart-ass for them to be running it, but I still would rather just see that stay on, like, Sci-Fi, I'd rather see that stay on Space. I don't like it on Space, but I'd rather see it stay on Space.
their version of when Adult Swim decided to start playing the Pee Wee Herman show.
I mean, even that's like kind of more fitting, because like that actually, it's more, you know what it's more like? It's more like when Adult Swim's like, oh, we've got to run, Saved by the Bell. Okay.
Oh yeah, that one too. Jesus.
Oh,
like,
man.
I mean, though I guess more equivalent for that would be like, is if Adult Swim Canada ran like Street Sense or something. Just put like some, that would be amazingly like old-timey Canadian teen content.
Yeah. So I will say that I think for the most part they've done a much better job of figuring out the brand.
Oh yeah, it looks a lot better. Like when you look at what they're scheduling, and also like there's some bold stuff. Like you're running like Joe Para in prime time. That's balls, man. Like, respect.
They're not doing that in the U.S., that's for
exactly.
Sure.
The movie, like, stuff like the movies, are running those live action movies. It is
albeit at, like, garbage times that no one will see them. Like, it's, like, perfectly
actually, it's getting worse. By the beginning of May, they'll be running 6 p.m. movies on Saturdays and Sundays. Yeah, and as we get further away from towards the end of the free preview period, they're actually running the movies every day, but just early in the morning. And, you know, I think it's safe to say that, you know, people don't really care what runs early in the day. Like
nobody's watching, like...
Oh, hey,
like,
Die Hard.
I mean, they've
Hill and Robot Chicken.
Given the set of information they, or of titles they have, they're trying to be pretty good about how they're scheduling it to get as much information back out of it. Like, you can tell the scheduling is also designed for them to learn from, I'd think. That, or they did it entirely randomly, and there was this, like, it's like, either they're very clever here, or they're just completely on autopilot, and I can't quite tell. But I'm gonna lean towards, given the rest of the effort that's put in, them being very clever about trying to work out what's gonna be optimal for them going forward.
Here's probably the biggest problem, is I don't think there's a singular vision behind how they're running Adult Swim Canada right now. You know, even if you can't watch Adult Swim Canada, I will say there are some promos that they released, leading up to the launch. And when I watch those promos, I think they really demonstrate a sense of the creative thinking going on behind this channel, because some of the promos are fantastic. They had that easy finance one, which it's great. It understands this Adult Swim kind of aesthetic of taking stock footage and stringing it together in something that becomes increasingly nightmarish and incomprehensible as it goes on.
Yeah, it just turns buzzwords into, like, hell.
Yeah, exactly. And there was also the handshake one. I think that with those two, they absolutely nailed it. Whoever was behind those ads, they get Adult Swim. I don't know if it was made in-house or outsourced, but regardless of how it was done, whoever oversaw the production of those ads understands the brand. So there are people there working on Adult Swim Canada at Corus. They understand the brand and they want it to get through. But that doesn't apply to every aspect of Adult Swim. There are a couple other ads, like the hockey player getting his hair combed, which is something I've seen that one running on the network, and it's on the website right now. A gymnast drinking maple syrup, stuff like that. That feels like it's okay, but
it's always awkward to see, like, to try and be like, hey, Canadiana, but weird in that context. Like, it takes a real fine hand. So it's nice that they're trying, but if they're going to lean into that, they're going to have, like, that's going to be an iterative process, and they're going to have to be willing to I mean, they're going to have to be as weird as Adult Swim is in the States and hire strange people to do this work.
A big problem with the old Adult Swim Canada approach, when they were actually putting effort into promoting the Cartoon Network block back in the day, was that they were always fixated on Canadiana and always put or really just weird Canadian stereotypes that can't be attached to anything, and just they put it at the center. And the other half of those ads, they're still doing that exact thing, just with a higher budget now.
Yeah.
So you still have kind of some of that misguided thinking going into a lot of the approach with the current Adult Swim Canada. And it seems that, I think for the most part, it is being run by the same people. You also have to remember that at Corus is run like a radio station, so everyone who works at Corus, there's no one who's dedicated to Adult Swim Canada. They have to do like 5 other things. Mm-hmm. But it's getting more attention now, and there's more hands in it. From what seems to be the case.
I mean, the biggest thing is you do look at that schedule and you're just like, they got a whole lot of Adult Swim acquisitions plus some other leftover Chorus bits in the movie rights, and you're like, okay, so is this just going to be this? In which case, I feel like there's always going to be a bit of they can sync up really nice with the U.S. network, but there's always going to be a bit of a limitation. Oh, and I should say they have a couple, we're not going to escape some of these shows so easily from the Teletoon days.
Yeah.
As slick as it is, the Archer Disney show is on Adult Swim Canada 24-hour. There is also, let's not forget about it. What's the thing that they have? They also have
Knuckleheads and Forget About It will be airing at 8 a.m. Starting in a couple weeks.
And that's, of all the stuff I guess it's not Crash Canyon.
Yeah.
Man, that was.
Yeah, I remember when I said earlier how
little I saw that
worse after Bromwell High. Crash Canyon, I think, is the lowest point that Teletoon at Night ever hit.
You know what the worst part about Teletoon's low points are, just as an aside, is Adult Swim will make batshit garbage. But at least they went all in. It's nuts. It's fun in that way. That is what kills about bad Teletoon adult content and bad CanCon generally is it's usually just aggressively mediocre. It never 12-ounce mouses its way until genius.
Yeah. Crash Canyon, it just so shamelessly knocks off or tries to make itself look like a Seth MacFarlane show. It's
flat. It's just
it's
a 22-minute drag.
Yeah. But there are certain decisions that show that they understand what people don't want on Adult Swim.
Yeah.
Like the movie, all the live action movies, they air at they are airing at various times, and they're going to increase as time goes on with the station, but they do not cross over the sacred 8 p.m. hour. Or at least that has not happened yet. So they're trying to keep that portion of the station kind of in line with, as in sync with the Adult Swim brand as they can.
Yeah.
And that's good. So they at least recognize that people don't want the movies. It does seem that for whatever reason they have to be there. I don't know if it's because it's mandated by Corus, because Adult Swim is the only property they have where, these action and crude comedy movies fit. Because, they obviously license these movies in big batches from studios, and they're just like, we have to put these somewhere that fits the audience most closely in our network of stations. And Adult Swim is going to be the closest fit for that right now. So this could be something mandated from the top. It could be just misguided decisions within the people who run the station. I don't know, but there is some bare minimum level of restraint being exercised right now. It's also possible that the station is replacing Action. I actually haven't been able to find a copy of its license, but it's possible that they are required to run movies, because Action did focus on movies initially, running action movies, basically.
Yeah, so if they're reusing a license or skating by on something, they may have a time frame where they have to do that, and then eventually they can be reassessed on that.
Yeah. I don't think that's the case, though, because...
Seems unlikely.
No one really cares about license conditions anymore. Ever since they killed genre protection in Canada, no one cares how closely you adhere to your genre.
Thanks,
that you were licensed for.
They were pretty much the reason genre protection died in Canada, MTV and Much. They basically said either we're going to fold these stations or we can run them the way we want to run them, which is exactly the way they're run in the US.
Yeah, that was a big thing behind it, I think. But yeah, so that's kind of where it's at. And of course, for the first 2 weeks of the station, as we mentioned, there's no CanCon, but the CanCon is going to be slowly rolled out.
And that already kind of hurts because I'm like, that's where you could have slid in some anime.
Well, here's the thing. So they're keeping the CanCon out of the primetime hours, which there's a few ways they could do this. In an ideal world where they still have to make CanCon, they would be making their own stuff. They would be greenlighting stuff that would be good enough for the U.S. network to air.
It wouldn't even. I mean, that would be ideal. I'd even just settle for stuff that's pretty solid, like Night Sweats.
Night Sweats,
because that costs nothing for them to run. It would fit in, like if you slid that in between, like Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell and Dream Company LLC. You wouldn't notice it. You'd be like, oh yeah, sure.
Night Sweat season 2, just have Chris and Bart make all the content themselves this time. Like that would be great, and that you could, even if they have to cut it down to 14+ so they can run it earlier in the day. I think it would still be, if they were doing stuff like that for the CanCon, that'd be great. And that would also fulfill the purpose of CanCon, which is to produce stuff, not air catalog stuff. But, it's just how regulation works. You find ways to get around it. But the problem is that by not airing CanCon at night, it limits what they can air. Because even though they're being extremely laid back in what they allow on the air during the day, like Two Nuts and a Richard, as awful as that show is, you can't get away with that in the morning. That would violate regulation.
Someone would be sad about it, and the problem is like we're not in the old days where just Canadian cable was wilding. Like we're just not in that lane anymore.
Well, on that I should probably point out that just to kill a common misconception, Canadian cable is more highly regulated than U.S. cable, actually. But the thing is that, because we have CRTC and CBSC regulations for content, but the thing is that those regulations are extremely permissive. As long as you keep the most adult graphic content after 9 p.m. Watershed, and you run disclaimers after every commercial break with a voiceover and just explicitly stating what's in the content, you can pretty much get away with anything. And then even during the day, they have like express guidelines that are pretty lax compared to what you usually see in the U.S. Like there's an explicit rule that says you can say shit during the day on Canadian TV. In the U.S., it's unregulated, but you also have advertisers are much more skittish in the U.S. in a big reason.
Advertisers are real twitchy.
Yeah, and it's almost entirely because of special interest groups, mostly run out of the U.S. Midwest, which are incredibly powerful and have a lot of influence.
Media and the family.
Yeah, and that stuff just doesn't exist in the same way in Canada, and that's why we see such a big difference in what you see you can see in Canadian cable and U.S. cable. Nonetheless, they are pushing. They're pushing it pretty. They are really pushing things so they can get away with during the day, but they still draw the line. Like Mr. Pickles, the
infomercials are all specifically being run late at night because they get pretty messed up.
Yeah. You're not gonna see too many cooks during the day, or Mr. Pickles or Super Jail or anything like that. But they run some stuff like they ran mostly for millennials during the day, which I thought was. Well, first of all, it was terrible. But also I thought it was.
That show.
Yeah.
Look, they needed someone to replace their other terrible shows.
Yeah.
Is this mostly for me?
Let's keep it 1,000. Do you want mostly for millennials, or do you want like $1 Million Extreme? Do we want the alt-right Adult Swim show?
Thankfully, $1 Million Extreme has been nowhere to be found.
Yeah, that would have been such a huge warning flag if I see that in the schedule list. I'd be like, yo, trying to get like Wild Rose voters in Alberta.
Oh God, yeah. The station's a little all over the place, and satisfying those CanCon regulations is probably going to be a challenge. And
it isn't helping it being scattershot. Like that's why you have, like I said, you don't run Stonatos for no reason. You're like, oh, that's 50% CanCon or maybe 100% CanCon.
But yeah, but well, like I said, like if it kills two birds with one stone, if they have to run movies and they have to run CanCon, getting those sci-fi direct to television movies, throw those on the air, 8 a.m. Fine, I don't care.
I feel like if it weren't for the fact that having people comment on a movie is trademarked, those would be the perfect thing to just be like, hey, you want to make that even more in branding? just put Snark over the top of it, or at least around it. Like, I hope the bumps they put on that stuff is just like, yeah, we legally have to air this garbage. We apologize. Like, that would be perfect. That'd be like, all right, go, you're fine. Like, if they can wrap the movies right, maybe it still shouldn't be there, but at least they could, like, sneak it into the town.
Yeah.
I'm not hopeful for that, but it would be awesome.
Here's the thing. They're not doing their own bumps or anything. There's a lot of the content they have is just brought in from the States. So far, all of the cards and bumps that I've seen are direct from the U.S., which is good.
Yeah, no, that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
But if you're going to start having stuff, the more content you run outside of that lane, which you may have to do, again, for regulations, the more they need to be able to kind of walk on their own 2 feet. Now,
the question is that going to keep going? Because right now, when we were getting the April Fool's joke, the Adult Swim was actually streaming that online, and I was like cross-checking between what was on in the U.S. and what was on in Canada. They got rid of the cards that say check out our streams, because one big problem with Adult Swim Canada with Corus is that they don't have any kind of streaming platform. There's nothing on the internet right now.
It's like, so they're owned by a cable company. So the last thing they want to do is provide over-the-top options. What Shaw wants you to do is to have a Shaw connection, and then you use Shaw's app to watch Shaw stuff. Like, that's.
But they don't even have an app you can use. They used to have Show Me, but they don't have they don't have anything like Crave, which is owned by Bell. So that's a big problem.
It's a big miss.
With the system right now, is that there's no Hulu in Canada, there's no Hulu equivalent. You just have these kind of broken streaming platforms that half serve the audience. You have basically you have Crave and you have CBC Gem, and then you have some French services. That overall is the big drawback of just having Corus have all this stuff. On one hand, Adult Swim content finally getting into the Canadian media ecosystem properly for the first time.
Well, in a massive way. Like, we would have settled for just literally new shit on Cartoon Network. Like, they could have they could have kept it.
I think that they have been planning to launch this since their last failed attempt to revitalize Adult Swim, because back in 2015, when they, expanded Cartoon Network, they hyped up that they were expanding Adult Swim Canada, and they almost seemed to be shocked that people were disappointed that there was no Adult Swim content in it. Because at that time, they very much just saw the Adult Swim brand as popular brand from the U.S. You run cartoons for grown-ups under.
This is the brand, right? You can run whatever you want. It's like, well, if that's the case, like, Adult Swim wouldn't be, like, constantly trying to get whatever creatives they could to do work for them.
That's what they don't understand. I guarantee you there was probably some meeting that went on in Corus that basically amounted to someone saying, hey, did you guys know that this Adult Swim thing is the highest rated network in the U.S. for men 18 to 34? I had no idea. I'll guarantee you those words were uttered at some meeting.
So, I mean, one thing that I'll say for the Canadian network is they launched it just in time, because they may have a harder time filling that channel in 2 to 3 years.
It could be too late. Like, I would not, this effort is not too little, but it might be too late. Because the thing is that ever since the backlash they got from in 2015, I think they have been trying to figure out Adult Swim, and they finally arrived at this as the solution. And I'm pretty sure that Adult Swim had a lot of problems on the other side too. Yeah, but just keep in mind that shortly after the 2015 thing happened with Adult Swim Canada for broadcast, then Adult Swim in the States launched the Canadian app, and then when that happened, Corus started marked about the time they went back on their plan to effectively move Teletoon at night over to Adult Swim Canada. So I think you can kind of trace their relationship that was going on during that time.
It's not great.
By how prominent that app was. So I think there was definitely kind of a back and forth going on there.
Probably some horse trading.
This is what we've arrived at now. And, the app was terrible, but at least you could get the whole, it let you get most of the library in Canada, at least, even if it wasn't ideal. One thing that has disappointed me with the station is that they were hyping up the on-demand selection, and it's almost nothing. It's just a bunch of random episodes. I don't understand why they can't just make the whole. I was hoping it would be like the whole library, similar to that app, available through on-demand.
I feel like it's going to be the kind of thing where they want to get everything first run on the network first, and then they'll be dumping stuff into the app slowly.
We'll see.
Like I feel like
not the app, on demand.
Into on demand slowly.
Yeah.
I feel like they're not.
Yeah.
And it's like honestly how a lot of cable stations populate their on demand is what's aired recently. So if nothing's aired recently, tough shit. But I do get the sense that if they didn't do a library from the jump, it means they're falling back to this is how we normally fill in on demand, and with all the bullshit that comes with that. I was like, I'd like to go back and I know that all of Steven Universe is aired in the States, but you can't see it all on my parents' on demand and Comcast. Yeah. They show it's whatever's aired recently.
Also worth emphasizing, still no streaming options for any Cartoon Network content in Canada at all, in any way. But again, it just shows the state of Corus right now. Yes, finally with Adult Swim, they got the linear more or less figured out.
Yeah.
Now there's
3 other things they need to sort with.
The on-demand is not sorted out, and then the online streaming option is non-existent, and there's no sign that that's going to be resolved on the horizon. So that's kind of the big trade-off here. It's hard to say how much, how far they're going to get with this station now because of that, which is pretty unfortunate. But again, that's something that we can really only speculate on right now, because it's really uncertain how Canadian media is going to evolve as everyone's scrambling to figure out the streaming thing. I do have one flaming hot take on that. I think that Corus and Shaw should partner with CBC Gem and get their stuff on that service. Because, CBC they have some third-party content.
CBC has actually managed to build a pretty decent app there because I think they understand that that is, it gets them, it's one way of them keeping relevance, even if people start dropping their cable subscriptions while also not necessarily getting OTA, especially in smaller markets. It lets people get access to CBC content one way or the other and justify its continued existence.
And they have third-party content too. They have Portlandia, Luther, and a few other shows from the US and UK. Yeah. So I think that getting stuff from Shaw would be for them it would certainly be a boon. I think it's something that Shaw and Corus should consider from their end too.
Because only promotionally. Even if it is a rinse on cost up front, you can be but now people know. People who are not necessarily going to seek that out, we can say hey, but they know now that this show is on there because we will stick a fucking card in front of it to say so.
Because they don't have their own infrastructure. They completely trashed it when they got rid of Show Me. And if they are building something new or coming up with a new strategy, they are taking way too long with it right now. They have to get this figured out fast.
Because it's they're under multiple guns with, especially I think the Adult Swim network in terms of what it is. Because at any moment AT&T might be we just want to do an international OTT play with all of this Turner Warner content. At which point, they'll gradually wind those contracts down and they will have nothing for it.
Yeah. And who knows, we're still waiting on Verve in Canada. And when Verve launches, maybe they'll want to have some of this stuff streaming on there.
Yeah. That's always a strong possibility. Verve is in such a bizarre spot right now because it went from being technically under the AT&T umbrella, which didn't involve any other media companies, to being fully under that and involving other media companies. Meanwhile, they'd already inked deals with Viacom for all this Nick content, and it's it's very obvious to me that that would be AT&T's easiest move into having their own, they could throw all of their content on that plus licensing and really get sort of jumpstart a Netflix kind of competitor or an OTT PSTV kind of competitor or both with that, because they've already got a solid app, they've got infrastructure, it's all very established and all very strong, and as best as anyone can tell is pretty scalable, other than when when Crunchyroll chokes when some new giant show drops and the site eats dirt.
Yeah.
There may be some scalability issues if they really wanted to make this an international play, but the parts are there in motion, and at any point they could say, we've got this huge library of content, and we're beginning to see other parts of our library being weaponized against us, or things that we had licensed previously and developed being now pulled back in and thrown against us. So we need to, at what point do they say, forget these short-term licensing things. We need to have our long-term walled garden rolling so that we can get that $8 a month or $10 a month.
Sketch, did you have any thoughts just on just what you've seen and heard of Adult Swim Canada so far and just the whole kind of strategy or whatnot behind it?
Well, as I looked over those promos, and I agree that I feel like they are aesthetically getting it right with those stock footage ones. And then the other ones that's just making fun of Canadian tropes, I'm not quite sure who that's supposed to be appealing to. Is it because as an American over here in the U.S., I'm like, this is kind of funny to me because lol, the Canadians. But why would the Canadians want to laugh at themselves like that?
It's never made any sense.
It's a very odd choice.
It's a very American view of Canadiana, where like a Canadian view of Canadiana would read much differently.
Yeah, it's like Canadians trying to emulate an American view of Canadiana and not getting it right at all.
Yeah, it's like some sort of like levels of abstraction or emulation there.
It's like this might have been a good idea, but not really.
Yeah.
Like I'm just so amused by this guy having gravy poured over him in a tub full of fries.
Like poutine guys.
Gross.
Does anyone else remember poutine? Which is like, okay, that's not a very American view of Canadiana, and I could say that as somebody who firmly straddles that.
Drinking maple syrup while doing gymnastics.
Yeah.
It's weird. As an American Canadian, or Canadian American, however you want to cut that one, I feel like there's other stuff that's like Canadiana that you'd probably want to like, if you want to make a joke about like how like Tim Hortons donuts suck now, but it's okay because Adult Swim is here. Like, just kind of like,
that would be better. Yeah.
Isn't it weird, or be like, isn't it weird that all of these, like, that Canada has a bunch of places named after American things? Boston pizza, New York fries, Montana's. How did that happen? Adult Swim. Boom.
Yeah.
You should be working for them. You should be doing the copy for them.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of which, Karl, you're not the one running that Adult Swim Canada parody Twitter, are you?
No, I wish I was. Like, if I were running that, I would be.
I assure you, it's not me either.
Yeah, I don't know who's running it. It's pretty good. On that note,
that person should have a job probably with actually Adult Swim Canada.
I think they may have been getting them to post updates.
That's brilliant.
I don't know. Yeah, that account is really great if you're not following it, by the way. And also, it looks. I was just informed of this. It looks like Adult Swim Canada is phasing out all of their existing social media. They shut down their Facebook. Their Twitter is locked. It's not clear what they're doing. What I find weird is that they have, through their promotional material, they have been directing people to the American social media for Adult Swim. So I wonder if they're even going to have a Canadian social media presence, or if they're just going to divert everyone to the U.S. If they're doing that, they really need to stick more closely to this idea of mirroring
they need the US station. They need to mirror the US station closely, and then at that point you got to say, like, actually what we're doing is basically having this whole thing. Like, at that point you're saying we're really just here as a conduit. You know, like, Corus isn't running the station. Corus is providing space for the station, and meanwhile all the guidance is actually just like, Lazo and DeMarco are working overtime as they often do on any sort of side project that doesn't yet make any money, and basically saying it's like this exists as a pipeline direct basically from Adult Swim US. So of course we can use the same social media because the schedules and the key areas are going to line up, and then it becomes a wedge for AT&T to then eventually take maybe one of the other channels that they have, and then maybe they'll eventually flip that content over there, and then they'll just literally be mirror stations. It's like, if that's a long-term plan, not an unreasonable one, though then anime will definitely have to show up on the Canadian station at some point, because that would be a major discontinuity. Because that would also be, for a US station, running anime reruns would be a great way to fill out the block, especially because there's a lot of that content that could easily be run during the day straight. So it's...
When you put it that way, you make getting anime on the block sound so dystopian.
Reasoning?
Yeah.
The reasoning?
Yeah,
because the reasoning being like you could it, and it's like it helps you align with a corporate American behemoth. Yeah, that's not a happy reasoning for it, but it is part of like it would be a possible driver. Because like the other things that I would consider obvious drivers clearly weren't enough that they would launch with it. Because the other side of it is like, run a bunch of ocean dubs.
Exactly.
One to lock them out of WoW, which is coming, and two, because that fills your time with something people actually give a fuck about. It's a win-win-win all across the board, and they didn't do it. Well, then cost or effort just must not be there for it.
Yeah. I mean, worth noting though that, and we'll get into anime more in a few minutes, but outside of anime, like there's not really any third-party content on the station at all outside of the Disney Fox shows. There's no Boondocks. There's no home movies. The fate of
I can see
Mike Tyson Mysteries is up in the air.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to happen with that show.
Yeah, I can see no home movies
starts.
because it's pre-HD. Like I don't think we're going to see any pre-HD acquisition content. That's just not how they run stations anymore. But it's interesting that there's plenty of post-HD acquisition content that they could have on, and the only things that they have technically in that lane, I mean, most of it's directly the same stuff that Adult Swim has, and then Archer.
Yeah. But with Canadian dubbed anime, I wasn't expecting any anime when the station launched, even if they have an intention of adding any, including the Fooly Cooly, season 2 and season 3, progressive and alternative. I will also say, even though they're funded by William Street, I think they're actually in the same kind of limbo as Mike Tyson Mysteries, which Netflix currently has because it was not made by not produced by William Street technically. It was produced by Warner, which was, until recently considered a completely separate entity from Adult Swim.
Yeah,
but of course now with the new AT&T control, that stuff's all getting amalgamated more.
Yeah.
So that raises questions about how that's going to look.
Well, I also wonder.
Nonetheless,
I also wonder specifically with Fooly Cooly, they really want that to be in, like, if I'm AT&T and I'm already doing things like saying, hey, Genlock's basically an anime. This also has to, I know it's for Rooster Teeth services, but we also got to stream this on Crunchyroll. I'd take a look at Fooly Cooly 2 and 3, especially me like, if we're putting this up anywhere for international access, it has to be on this platform we already have.
Yeah.
Or we'll sit on it until it's square. Like they will wait, they will iron out those rights until they can, because that makes so much damn sense. Yeah. It's such good business.
Going back to what you said about Adult Swim Canada just being a vessel for AT&T content, like right now it doesn't feel that way at all. Mm-hmm. Corus is still very much running the show.
Yes.
And you feel that in the station, and that's not in itself a bad thing, but the fact that the problem is that they're still making the same kind of mistakes in terms of emulating the Adult Swim atmosphere and flow is a problem. So I know I described how great the April Fool's joke was when it launched, and how everything, they had the bumpers, they had the proper cards, they had
the flickering logo,
the logo, but they had also 2 ad breaks every half hour, that's been one consistent problem with Adult Swim content, is that Teletoon would always splice an extra ad break in and then end the show at the end of the credits and then transition into the next show, whereas the proper Adult Swim flow, which in my opinion is a very important part of the voice and overall brand of Adult Swim, is that
part of the aesthetic.
Part of the aesthetic, you have one ad break in the middle of a program, then one ad break at the end of the program, and then from there you move on to the next program. Mm-hmm. There's a very specific flow. Go read Raymond Williams' work on how television flows. Like, Adult Swim is kind of self-aware of that flow of television, and it plays with it. And that's an important part of the experience of watching the block. And that is something that's missing in Adult Swim Canada, and it makes everything feel cheap when you get rid of that and splice those extra ad breaks in. Yeah. And, just have those Corusisms popping up. Now, here's the thing about the station, about how Corus runs stations, and we'll get into Toonami and anime again in a sec, but I want to state something very important, is that when right now they are putting a lot of resources in, and I think they're listening to feedback about how what people want from this station. It's important to note that when a Corus runs the channel, there's like a 1, maybe 2 year window in which they're going to invest in the station and try to improve it. After that, the station is going to go into like kind of an automation mode. Usually it'll be a peg or two below wherever they set the bar when they're paying attention to things. And then wherever it settles into after that, that is the station it's going to be until the day it's terminated. We've already seen this happen with Nick Canada. We've seen it happen with Cartoon Network Canada. Yeah. Cartoon Network Canada is what it is now is what it will be until the day it's terminated. And unfortunately, it's a little worse than it was when it launched. When it launched, it had everything day and date with the US. They had very, fairly current promos. It was, it wasn't a complete sync with the US, but it was pretty close. But they let things slip over time. Now things are like, I think at best maybe like a few days delayed from the US, but usually a week. Scheduling's a bit more all over the place. The promos are out of date. We don't see a lot of new promos. It's going to be like that till the station ends.
I can't recall though. Does Cartoon Network Canada run non-stop Teen Titans though?
It doesn't. No.
So I mean, technically, you gotta give them a little credit.
Okay. It's
disrespect to Teen Titans,
it's for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
But I will give them credit for that. But the thing is with Adult Swim Canada, like whatever is the best they can make that station within the next 1 to 2 years. Yeah. Slightly worse than that is what the station is going to settle into being forever. So I think it's really important that they get the quality up as high as possible, so that what we're stuck with is maybe a little better than what we're getting now.
Yeah.
And I think, and I kind of like to hear your thoughts on this too. But I think there are several key things that they absolutely have to do, and just make as regular practices in running the channel now while they still can, and so that it will forever be just a part of how things are done and how things are done by default with the way that you run Adult Swim Canada as an everyday thing. They need to keep fighting to have 2 ad breaks every half hour and have shows end on an ad break rather than end on the final credits. They do this with Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty is the one exception. So that if they can pull it off with Rick and Morty, I think they can pull it off with their other 30-minute programs. And it really, having those extra ad breaks spliced in really destroys the flow of like Samurai Jack and Adventure Brothers.
Well, yeah.
And that stuff.
Well, yeah. No, the thing is like the Adult Swim, I'd call original content, or Cartoon Network original content, is 2 ad break content, all of it. And so that needs to be handled that way. I don't care if they do it for the Fox shows, because Fox shows are 3 ad break content or more, for some of the later season stuff on that.
Yeah.
Fine. That's been meant to flow in that way. That's how it's been built for television. But for any of the stuff that was built by Turner, Warner, Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, it's always been built since network inception for 2 ad breaks. You got to do it like that, or you're screwing up the flow.
Yeah.
And
if nothing else, even if they can't reduce the number of ad breaks, they should at least have the 3rd ad break at the end of the program rather than before the credits.
Yeah.
And keep that flow going. Another point that they also have disclaimers that are different. This is actually one thing I wanted to emphasize. They have very well done disclaimers on the new Adult Swim Canada, but they're done closer to compliance with CBSE regulations. So, it details, sexuality, coarse language, violence, and they have a narrator saying these things. Because they're actually supposed to be voiced. They were not in compliance with this on the old Adult Swim Canada. So that's something that can be kind of grating when it's run over and over. That's a consistent part of Canadian television. But reducing the number of ad breaks will also help.
How often does that air? Every hour?
So according to CBSC regulations, you have to run a disclaimer after every commercial break and at the beginning of a program. But the trade-off is that when you run those disclaimers, your ass is covered for anything you air.
Yeah, it's basically like, we said these words, get out of jail free, now we can use all the swears and duty we want. Like, they can, we joke, but literally with those cards, they could run name, a controversial anime, and they would be cleared. They'd be cleared for anything.
That's the trade-off, and something that I wish they would take advantage of more. They can run anything. Even during the day, technically it will cover them for a lot of graphic violence and nudity during the day, because there aren't explicit rules against showing those things during the day. As long as you are able to prove that it's not sexually explicit or overly gratuitous. And like something like Samurai Jack, for instance, the violence is anything but gratuitous in that show in season 5.
Yeah.
So by CBSE regulations, there's no problem with running that during the day as long as you have the right rating and the disclaimers.
Right.
But you know, if you have when you have 3 ad breaks spliced in the show, that's 4 disclaimers through the show.
Well, it'd be great if that's another reason to keep the ad breaks on the low, is it just keeps you out of that problem of constantly interrupting your flow with the following program may have a lot of and now, 30 seconds later.
To be fair, the disclaimers I think they were actually done in the US because they fit the current. They have like the nature scenes, so they put effort into that to make it fit in, which is good. Well, they weren't doing that before.
The biggest thing is this is like, so Adult Swim has a certain aesthetic now. It's Adult Swim, they'll inevitably evolve it, and that's the make or break point. Is like at the point at which Adult Swim America, and there's a couple of things that come there. The point at which Adult Swim America switches up their look, the point at which they come to terms with whatever they're going to get to keep or lose from Disney Fox, and also any new programming from here on out. Like right now they're day and date with like a lot of cool stuff like Laser Wolf and all that. They're also finally digging back into a bunch of stuff that they had missed. Great. They have to keep that up. They really actually can't fall below that. They can't be 2 pegs below where they are now, which means in the next year they need to try harder. So if they fall back to this, it's okay.
Yeah. They have to,
that's the tough part.
They have to keep it day and date. They cannot slip at all, and that goes not just for content, but also for cards and bumpers.
Yeah,
that stuff has to be day and date with the U.S. as well. It is, as far as we can tell, it is. But if things start changing in the U.S. and they don't change in Canada, that's going to be a very bad sign. So
that's the canary, man, right there.
That kind of refreshing has to be part of the deal. Again, it's not clear where they are with that, but. They can fix it.
Yeah, because like the worst thing Corus can do is like we did this one-time push and then let it autopilot. And like that's not how Adult Swim has maintained vitality, by not just staying in the same lane for nearly 20 years now. Like part of the reason why Machu Picchu was so unexpected is it was like this throwback to this earlier Adult Swim aesthetic. But that's the whole point is that aesthetic has changed over time.
Yeah.
And so if they don't keep up with that on the Canadian channel. That's it. Like they are literally a handful of slight changes and they'll already be in the hole again. At which point Corus will probably just let it roll. Probably just let it die.
One thing that's noticeably missing is promos from the US. Even though they have simulcast premieres, they do not have any promos. In the entire time the station has been running this week, they have not run a single promo for Laser Wolf. Whereas I know they've been running them all the time in the US.
Oh, yeah.
So they didn't even cut one themselves. I think that they need to try and push for promos to be part of what they're getting, at least for those premieres, because their in-house ads are not very good. They're better than they were when they were on Cartoon Network. But they're still leaning back on footage of the show, white text on black, and then if you're lucky, they don't do any voiceover. But sometimes they do a voiceover and it ruins it. They have a Rick and Morty show, promo running right now. It would be mediocre and watchable were it not for this terrible voiceover that they put in.
Rick and Morty, and it's like no announcer voice.
Yeah, it's really bad. They need to reevaluate that. And still, a lot of the ads are like splicing in white text on black card aesthetic, which I don't believe Adult Swim in the States have actually used for any of their promos in years.
I don't think really ever. Like even Adult Swim, that's for a general block promo. Yeah. For a specific show, usually they're a little bit more. Or put it this way, to the extent it's like that white text that's right at the end of the ad, and it's sharp and it's quick and it's the right font size and it's 100% on point and aesthetic, and then the rest of the ad's been really snappily, like, cause I think they did some stuff for that for like Family Guy back in the day. Yeah. But I mean, it's really, if you're gonna do those kind of ads, you have to be great with editing, and of course Cartoon Network has like kept its murderer's row of editing talent for, again, decades. Like the people who worked on Toonami promos back in the day work on them now. And they're now at the point where a generation raised on that quality is applying for jobs with degrees and now working at Cartoon Network. Yeah. So that cycle is not present here in Canada. So you either have to start it or you just have to go buy it. And it seems stupid not to just get, we're running all your shows, send us all the promo material.
that aesthetic is only for the cards. It's not for promos. And when they lean back on it, it's just being cheap.
Yeah.
I think that's a hurdle for Adult Swim, is that executives will often look at just the simple white text on black aesthetic, and they see that and they say, "Oh, great, we don't have to spend any money on this."
We could have an intern go make these cards. Yeah. It's like, unless that intern is like, you know, a certain mailroom intern at Turner who ended up running the network, that ain't gonna work.
Yeah, they have to break away. They have to break away from that. They cannot lean on the card aesthetic.
Well, they can't. Well, I mean, if it's going to be there, you still need somebody who actually has the drive to edit a promo. So it's actually not going to. It's not going to be cheaper per se.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's one thing they have to do. Move away from that aesthetic and try and get some U.S. promos because they can't cut them all themselves. They need to get rid of the movies. The movies, they fit the Teletoon at Night brand for better or worse, but you know, they don't fit Adult Swim. At the very least, and it seems that they might not be able to. This might be like a upper management thing, making them run the movies. They need to at least get rid of those 6 p.m. Saturday and Sunday movies.
No, they can be on at garbage times in the morning that most people are probably just watching traffic on City to know whether they're going to get to their commute.
Yeah, but then even then, like, if they got to run movies, at least put a little more thought. Like, what if Adult Swim in the U.S. were to start running movies? What would they run?
Yeah,
I think that's a question they should ask.
What they should do is they should literally go to, like, you're buying this stuff from them. You got to be talking to them and be like, look, we got to run movies. It's in our license, or our bosses are saying that, but we're allowed to, like, look around at stuff. If you were to run movies on Adult Swim, Mr. Lazo or whatever, what would you pick up? Like, if you had this kind of budget, what would you kind of like be looking at for these things? Or what would you guys be looking at towards your own catalog if you had to do it? Like, if AT&T came to you tomorrow and said, like, you got to run something out of the Warner catalog, what would you pick? And same question, but Corus catalog.
Yeah.
And I think there's good answers to that. I think some of those may literally be like, he might literally say, like, run the weirdest garbage you have and then, like, promo your way out of it. That's a super Adult Swim thing to do. And you absolutely you could make that into its own weird, screwy staple, but that requires effort. And I think what it keeps boiling down to is Adult Swim is an achievable thing, but you have to put fucking time into it, even if it seems like it's really simple. It's that effortless flow of movement where you have all the little cues and hallmarks in just the right spot, and you can make any of this stuff work. And that's been something Cartoon Network's been genius about for, again, 20 years. Like, Card Captors on Kids WB looks like garbage. You see the Toonami promo and you think it's the hottest shit ever, because they understand what to pull out, even of a bad dub that's been hacked to bits, how to sell that show. And that's something that Adult Swim Canada can do, even if they get saddled with some weak content, but they have to take the time to do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to detract from everything else they're doing.
Looking at the schedule so far, it's definitely a bizarre thing to look at, because I did kind of keep a little bit of tabs on the Adult Swim block schedule over in Canada, and always seemed to be fairly, it's always the same crap over and over again. But this is definitely way more interesting, and honestly, probably, as weird as it looks, in a sense, probably more interesting than if they had done an Adult Swim 24/7 in the U.S.
Yeah, I don't think Adult Swim 24/7 in the U.S. is going to run like the NTSF yada 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 at noon.
No.
I mean, and they actually are running some of the infomercials like in the middle of the day on Saturday, 1:30 p.m. Check it out with Scott Clam. 1:45 p.m. The Suplex Duplex Complex. Like, that's nuts. Yeah. That's crazy.
A lot of this might be a stunt for the preview period.
Even if it's a stunt, like it's such like they are stunting. They're running bedtime stories at 1 p.m. They're running like that is
pretty wild.
That's like, there's no way the U.S. Here's the thing. There was no way the U.S. would stunt like that. They have enough data where they'd be like, we're going to put like, I mean, especially with how a lot of U.S. cable channels are programmed now, I could easily just see like in between like 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. just literally just being rotating like different animated sitcoms. And then all the weird shits in between 10 p.m. and 10 a.m.
Yeah.
Like easily that would be in no way no way shocking. And anime, to the extent that would be in the daytime loop, would just be like,
Yeah.
DBZ, My Hero Academia.
Well,
You know,
that's the thing.
or DB Super, My Hero Academia, and like Naruto and shit. Like just like the big fucking shonen titles. Actually, like if I were them, I'd be like, haha, we finally get to run the shonen titles in the afternoon again. Psych! Toonami's back, bitches. Like that would be their huge cheat.
That would be great, but they would probably be more like, let's put this on at 6 a.m.
Yep. Good morning.
We already touched on the idea that if they were to run just like 4-hour marathons every day of Inuyasha or Ocean Dub, Dragon Ball Kai or something, they could satisfy their Canadian content regulations by doing that, while also staying completely in line with the Adult Swim brand.
And while also giving, like, it gets to that point of you're building a higher level to fall back from.
Yeah. Now we have to point out they still have to meet CPE, Canadian Program Expenditure requirements, but honestly, the companies all do, like, weird bookkeeping to shift around stuff they produce for some stations and credit it to other stations. So
I know we never aired this on Adult Swim Canada. We only aired it on something, but it counted. Wink.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like I think fulfilling the CanCon quota, that's one thing for sure. But in terms of the question of can Toonami work on Adult Swim Canada, I think is a big question. I have no doubt that is the number one question that the people running Adult Swim Canada are probably getting right now, and I feel kind of sorry for them because
they put so much work into this. Clearly,
I know. Yeah, like
especially for a group that's not used to this kind of work and this kind of attention.
Yeah. It's like this is the question people always leap to, but you know, to me, just getting Adult Swim content properly represented in Canada has always been just as important to me as anime. Mm-hmm. So, like, to get Toonami, this is like they've overcome the first hurdle, which is more or less figuring out Adult Swim.
Yeah.
The idea, like, but the fact they still have a lot of trouble just putting this stuff together. The idea that they could, and a big test is going to be how they handle this simulcast content.
Yeah.
Machu Picchu shows that there's probably higher quality control when they're doing simulcast.
It's not impossible.
Yeah. But putting together Toonami is like logistically very complex.
Well, and it's something that even isn't necessarily properly fully accounted for at Adult Swim proper. Well, no, it would, here's the thing, is there's a lot of expense in that's not effectively on the books. There's still a lot of that's, even though it's been running and been back for so long, there's still an aspect of people handling things, it's a part of a bundle of responsibilities, so its accounting there is loose.
Yeah.
So it's hard, it's one of many things DeMarco does. DeMarco also runs all this music shit. DeMarco does all this other stuff. So it's hard to then say Toonami cost X dollars because everybody who's working on that works on 3 or 4 other things. So it's very easy for that to slide in there. Here it would be an explicit, not just the acquisition cost expense, which Cartoon Network may, now have a bit of a slide on now that they're properly corporate cousins with Crunchyroll. I don't see AT&T not synergizing that. And plainly they are because they are co-proing the Blade Runner anime. So that for example, let's take that Blade Runner anime. Now there's something that would be like that would be a hell of a simulcast, right? It would make perfect sense to simulcast that in both places. But then you have to take the effort to do that. And that's a big ask of Corus.
I am very certain that Blade Runner anime at the very least is going to show up on, if nothing else, on Adult Swim Canada.
But will it show up with all the window dressing? Because it would seem so fucking weird to run that straight rather than at least getting, even if the only Toonami block you had was literally the wrap around that, you'd think you'd at least get that.
Now Sketch, I'm interested to hear your take on this. Based on everything that's been going on, what do you think what do you really think the prospects of Toonami being able to come to this network are?
Yeah, the thing is, as Karl mentioned, all of the wraparound of Toonami, that's just a bunch of extra work that people do out of the goodness of their hearts over at Adult Swim. If they have a fairly similar schedule, maybe they could just borrow that stuff. There have been other Toonamis in other countries that have borrowed U.S. stuff and, redubbed them or whatever. But I think it might be asking a bit too much to wholesale bring over the brand. But then again, there's no reason why they necessarily couldn't do it. It just kind of goes along with, you bring over this brand, but you also have to have content to make it have a point. Because sure, you could wrap that around Samurai Jack and just Fooly Cooly and yeah, good enough. But if you don't bring shows to the table to air within this version of Toonami, there's kind of no point in having a Toonami.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, they could literally just play that Blade Runner show outside of Toonami and, make their own promos or whatever. And that seems a lot more likely.
It's even like a third worst case, whereas they have the Blade Runner promo, but they just cut the Toonami branding out of it. It just has like a shitty Adult Swim card.
Ooh.
Some of those Samurai Jack promos did get reworked to be more general.
Exactly, right? So it's like, I could see that.
I could see that kind of thing happen, yeah. Definitely. But.
And if I'm not mistaken, Jason DeMarco has said, I think, a couple times, both on the Toonami pre-flight streaming program and on Twitter, that if Teletoon or Adult Swim Canada wanted to launch Toonami, that the Toonami team would be willing to help out with them and provide them with materials.
Yeah.
Probably.
I mean, that's just an issue of sending bits around. And honestly, the flip side of this is we talked about, like, it's a lot of effort, but it's like, look, the actual Toonami CG pre-render stuff is pre-render. It's all presets with stuff being dropped in. So really you just need, for the stuff that you're running the same, you literally just need to edit it in, and you need a narrator to, like, say, at blank o'clock. And you know what? You could even say, like, knowing that you're going to package the block for 2 countries or more, do multiple takes on that so you can kind of cut that stuff around and save yourself a whole shit ton of effort. There are ways to make this cheap, and Lord knows they're certainly experienced with that. But that still requires Corus to, like, step up the plate and play ball.
Yeah.
Going back to the idea of trying to put as much effort into the block within a brief period of time when they're,
Toonami would be the greatest example of that.
Yeah. Like, a determining factor, I think, will be if they want to do Toonami, how much effort are they willing to put in now, in these initial launch years to get it going? Because there's 2 ways you can do it, in my mind. One, you can just get kind of the raw materials from Adult Swim and license the stuff yourself directly and just kind of build your own block with the materials you're given around it. I don't know how customizable they can get with it, but they could do something that way. And, Steve Bloom has been very giving, with his contributions for Toonami as Tom.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they can probably get him to record a few additional materials. But if you go that way, it's definitely not going to be anywhere near as elaborate as the US Toonami is.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to get custom Tom segments every week. I think the best thing you could crank out is you can get him to make custom disclaimers that could run.
I think the only way you'd have custom from them is if that's being sent over. I could see them doing just actually building things around the disclaimers that they're obligated to run after every ad could be a neat workaround. Just because as a one time or like every couple of years kind of thing, just get them to produce a couple of custom disclaimers for Canada, and that's all we get. That's unique, but it would be enough to kind of sell the brand if they did it that way. And the thing is those disclaimers can still be basically built out of reused animation. It's just narrative. It's just narrative and cut. It's low cost. But Toonami is another thing that, again, has very explicit visual language that changes over time. So if we got a Toonami and then 2 years later Toonami updated its graphics package and Adult Swim Canada did not update its Toonami's graphics package,
then it's like all the other Toonamis around the world.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, considering that Canada has never had Toonami and is the only major English-speaking country that has never had Toonami, I'd be okay with that.
Wait. Has India had Toonami?
I believe it has, yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a second. Well, okay, so it's making sure that we weren't like ignoring.
They got Dragon Ball Z way later than the rest of us.
Yeah. No, we are the only major English-speaking market that hasn't had a Toonami of any kind. So, I mean, anything would be good, really. But, I mean, the other way that they could do it is they could make some kind of deal with the Toonami team so that when they license programming, they license it both for U.S. broadcast and Canadian broadcast.
I imagine, a lot of those times those rights are cousins anyways. Like, a lot of those times you're signing for North American English language rights.
They can, and then they could essentially do that and then simulcast the entire Toonami block and simply simultaneously substitute Canadian ads
and warnings.
I mean, that would be the best.
I mean, it would be the best, but at the same time, it then robs it of the one level they could take it up higher, which is there is more latitude for the Canadian block to run certain kinds of content. And I think there's more latitude or appetite in Canada to run adult anime that's necessarily outside of the action lane. Like, that's my one caveat. It's always my one caveat with Toonami as a concept is like, it's been great for introducing a very specific slice of anime and keeping that viable and visible in the US mindset. But it is more than ever, a narrow slice and not demographically representative. Like, most of the attendance, like, if all of that stuff is ostensibly targeted at males 18 to 34, that really ignores the fact that, like, your average anime con attendance or your median anime con attendant is not a adult male, but probably like a teenage girl, frankly, at this point. So there's still this huge gap in content that you've got a fresh network that's geared around being experimental and has, like, weird late night hours to play with, and you're just like, Toonami's a great use of time, and it would be a good baseline, but they could reach. I just don't think Corus has it.
That's a problem with the U.S. version of the block too.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. If you hew to the U.S. version of the block, it's still probably it's good. It's not great.
I'd make the argument that, just like I said, I think that this schedule represents something way more creative than Adult Swim US would do with 24 hours.
So it'd be cool if they could show that with anime.
It's just going to be the same kind of whatever's popular anime, mainly shonen series, mainly long-running series, and that they could definitely do better. They could strive for...
Well, especially, it's like depending on how integrated this thing is with Adult Swim, and now therefore consequently AT&T, and therefore consequently Crunchyroll. There's a pipeline to different stuff here, theoretically.
Yeah.
And man, that could be, this also depends on how in the game, like, as much as I'm putting shit on Corus during this podcast, a lot of it also depends how in the game, AT&T as an organization is with all this media stuff and what they're how they view their different brands and how they view their marketing opportunities and how they look at their analytics and how they sort of say going forward, they have transformed basically overnight into a media company that's trying to herd a notoriously disparate group of companies plus the companies they had already also bought and figure out what that means. And with Canada, produces a specific challenge of then saying, do you work with Canadian partners because they know the marketplace easily? Do you try and Netflix their way in there and take whatever kind of trouble that causes and do that outlay? But depending on what you're doing, that means there's a lot of different opportunities for this Adult Swim block, depending on what they get offered, that they're going to have to make decisions on what they take. But I think they could, I think there's initiative they can take too, but they've got it. This is the window.
Yeah, so that's the key thing. That regardless of what they do, like, how much effort they put into it at this point is going to determine kind of what it is forever. And I think that's the important thing to emphasize. In terms of the approach with, like, just doing a one-to-one block, simulcast block with the States, I think there are a number of trade-offs, more than a few.
I mean, but it would be a good, probably, like, once they started that, I don't see them falling below that, so that would be kind of great.
That's one of the key things, is that it would probably be very difficult to orchestrate that initially.
Once it's done, it's done. They're not going to unentangle themselves from that ever.
It's because it's doable. Like, that's what the Comedy Network does with the Daily Show, is that they simulcast the Comedy Central broadcast and then sub their own ads in.
Yeah.
And then what you're looking at here is obviously more elaborate, but once the work has been put in to get that as a regular practice,
it would be probably set it and forget it.
Yeah, exactly. It can just keep going indefinitely, and at the very least, we would always know that we are 1-to-1 with what the U.S. market is getting. And and to be fair, like, that's what the anime industry wants, is that they want us to just be the same market, even though, because whenever there's anything that comes up that creates a division between Canada or the U.S., or means that Canada doesn't get something the U.S. does, the companies are more inclined to just ignore it rather than address it. So if they know that Canada and the U.S. are on the same page with Toonami, that definitely puts things into their favor.
Well, it also it would also make them happier about selling. It's like then they're in a position of saying like, well, it's a negotiating leverage too, because they say like, no, it's for real North American rights. You can't say like, well, but we're only really going to broadcast in the States. Like, we have to buy it this way, but we really don't want to pay this. They can say like, no, like, it's for real North American rights. Like I said, the extent to which that matters, the extent to which they're going to need that external content, I think will change over time with Crunchyroll, being a production studio with, I would not roll out Genlock on Toonami long term. Like, after they've burnt it out on demand, why not give it, if only to hype the next season, stream the old one or run the old one on the block. Even though it's tricky because it's like for real 30-minute episodes, so you might have to like fuck around with it. Hey, that's even better. Hey, you want to see the real version? There's all these opportunities they have now, and there are things that having a Canadian block is probably a net benefit on, because like, again, some of that would, if what part of what you're doing is Toonami is a vector for streaming Crunchyroll content in dubbed English, well, Crunchyroll sells subscriptions in Canada too, right? Like, even if it's the
only way to watch it in Canada.
Exactly. So towards that end, there is an aspect of, depending, if you think about these things as like holistically, and you have to think that AT&T is doing that more so by virtue of the darlings they've already killed than Time Warner ever did in years and decades of being a company. Towards that end, then if you have a Canadian partner that is willing to do the work, they may say like, hey, we need you, actually, even if Adult Swim is pushing back, they may force them into it. I don't think Adult Swim would push back, so I think everybody's on the same page here, so long as somebody takes the initiative. That's great. Yeah. I think that's probably the best that's been in, like, since Adult Swim has been this sort of content gap in the Canadian landscape. The scenario where we are in now is probably our best single shot, but it's a narrow window.
Yeah. And also, there's another thing, is that if, when WoW World finally does launch, and I'm pretty confident we will see that channel launch before the end of the year.
I'm going to be so interesting to see what they end up with.
Yeah.
Because again, it's technically very tied in with AT&T now.
It is. They share DNA with Frederator Studios, which is tied to Crunchyroll.
Verve, but Elation.
Verve.
Elation Studios being a whole nother like. So could we end up with Elation titles on Adult Swim and therefore eventually on Adult Swim Canada? Let's see, 2020.
Yeah, they have a pipeline too.
Mm-hmm.
So if they were to go with just a straight simulcast, the Toonami block option, you could have a potential situation where WoW World is grabbing the rights to some titles, and then they have to, like, black those, or they have to sub something else in during that time, which would, throw off the whole schedule.
Inuyasha Final Act.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, like, I am still rooting for WoW World. I want that, I hope they have anime when they launch, and I think that's an even better opportunity to kind of forge something that's different from
it has a better. I mean, it has less traction because it's a new brand, but it's a new brand, and so Adult Swim settled very quickly into 18 to 34 male, And that's great. It's a super lucrative demographic. I'm a male between the ages of 18 to 34. People listen to any dumb thing that I say. Simpsons got it right. But it's a slice. There's a lot of money that's being left on the table. And in a media landscape as saturated as it is now, grabbing different chunks is the whole game. Like, that's part of why Netflix works, is because they'll say, like, it's the same global game playing. It's like, yeah, we didn't just make content for Japan. We then said, here's Terrace House with English subtitles. And you're like, that's super niche, but they're going to catch viewers by doing it. And you have to be willing to find those angles. WoW can be in a much broader position than that, for at least.
Yeah. So then there's that issue. And then, of course, the other trade-off is that there's no opportunity for the Canadian audience for the audience to cater to the block to cater to the Canadian audience at all. Because if you have a situation where a show is a hit with Canadian viewers, it's not going to have any influence on what gets programmed on Toonami. And the thing about Toonami is it's always growing and changing according to what the audience responds to. But that will remain the U.S. So, we kind of lose our autonomy as an audience in that respect, even if we're getting direct access to the U.S. block, which that's an important part of television.
Yeah, and so the difference there is with the original comedies. I mean, they're always going to get a pretty prime slot regardless. But Toonami runs from 11 to 4, and you got shows premiering at 2:30, 3 a.m., and that's definitely not ideal if you're trying to appeal to a broad.
Yeah, and also the Canadian, like, it could, if they launch Toonami, they could have interest in having the block earlier in Canada.
Maybe
if they find that the audience would respond to it, but then that wouldn't be possible if you're doing a direct simulcast from the U.S. I think the best compromise might be doing both. Actually, would be to have the block simulcasting, but have kind of a pre-block maybe where they focus on shows that either stuff that we've missed over the years or just stuff they want to try with Canada, but they don't think will work in the U.S.
And that is a lot of shows.
Yeah. On that note, I think we should probably wrap up soon. For the last little bit, I think maybe we'll just go into like just total speculation, kind of what we hope to see come out of this. If I know a lot of people don't like that kind of thing where we're just baselessly speculating about.
Here, let's give ourselves a timer. So, I'm going to pull up a timer, and this is for all of us, so that this doesn't go long. I'm going to pull up a 5-minute timer, speculation, and then we wrap.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
If you don't want to listen to this stuff, you can just
timer.
bow out now.
Okay,
this episode is effectively over.
Start. Here we go.
Okay, if they air one anime and one anime only, regardless of how they run the block, I think it has to be Pop Team Epic.
Yeah, that would actually. Because you know what? You can air that regardless of a block. That can run anywhere, and it's funny. And it's also, I think you could run that during the day most of the time too. Like it can be before Watershed. So what's great? Yeah, no, I can't think of anything I'd prefer more. At least in terms of stuff they've run before.
Mob Psycho 100 would be my number 2.
Yeah,
like regardless of how they approach it, like they have they have to air that.
I'd feel let down if we don't get the Blade Runner simulcast. So that would be a real kick in the teeth.
Yeah. If anything is guaranteed, like I think we're going to get that. Mm-hmm. Like I think that they will, if one anime they go for, it's probably going to be that one.
Yeah, I agree.
Sketch what you want.
Yeah.
What do I want? I want Ranma 1/2 every day.
The HD remasters probably look great. And again, though, I mean, uncut, that's definitely going to be late night. That's going to be.
No, they could run it during the day because if you make because the sexual
disclaimers.
The nudity isn't sexual.
That's
so
true.
You could
wish.
Technically, you could get away with it during the
that
day.
That would be one of the. I mean, that's one of the things is anything that we suggest during the day would just be like that'd be great because it's like especially. Regardless of Toonami packaging, but especially with Toonami packaging, would make the U.S. jealous to be like, fuck them, they got a daily Toonami block again. Love it. Chef's kiss.
Thing with Rama though,
I want to happen.
I would like to see that go
make
to
daily Toonami
the WoW Crave because that way the show could finally be streaming on Crave because that's currently not streaming at all in Canada.
Yeah, so, it's true. Until there's there's a lot of stuff where it'd be like it'd be cool to see it here, but it would be more useful.
Yeah.
If Crave wants to do go all in on anime, then that's cool. I think it'd be a great way to, like we mentioned, it'd be a great way to get that Canadian content in. Just throw on Inuyasha. They've never played the final act. Throw on G Gundam. That's never played in the Canada, has it?
It hasn't. And Final Act is never streamed here either. Another reason why, again, maybe that I almost kind of prefer to see that on WoW. But, you know, it could go either way. We'll see what happens. Who you snooze, you lose with this stuff.
Yeah.
Whoever's
it would be good.
fastest
It would be good to have all the shonens up here just because there's no space for them. And I think they do benefit. I mean, culturally, the impact of those things in the U.S. is very evident now. You have like rappers named Kid Buu on satellite radio. We live in a weird, the late Triple Extension, Triple Extension. He collabed with like legit straight up anime rappers and shit early on. Like it's a huge part of modern, like, street culture is anime. And the fact that that's absent in Canada is evident. And
it's the one thing that truly separates Drake from other rappers, is that you know he wasn't influenced by Toonami.
Yeah, whereas like all other rappers, like, think about like some of the first beats that Jay Dilla sold was to Adult Swim.
Yeah.
That's wild.
One other show, is actually Code Geass. It's the show, I've always been kind of critical of that show, but
it would be a good fit.
I think it would be neat because it would be a good fit because if Bionics had kept going, it almost certainly would have been the next show that they had picked up.
Oh, yeah.
Death Note.
Also,
Probably.
for like an earlier Digicel technically show, I think it holds up. Like, it holds up visually.
It's HD. It is HD.
Yeah.
And also the show does have nudity in it, so that would be an opportunity to have something that would normally be, differentiating, would normally be censored on the US version. And was censored.
Would it be great to have
US
Ghost
version.
in the Shell?
Yeah, because we never got season 2 of Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. So
Ooh.
good. Again, we're getting really old with that one, but it would be a nice opportunity to kind of go back and make up for that.
Animated in HD at incredible expense at the time. It would hold up. We got 30 seconds. We gotta think. Throw shows.
Space Dandy.
Yes.
Yeah, like they could just get like a Funimation grab bag of Adult Swim. Fooly Cooly Season 1, Cowboy Bebop, Space Dandy.
Yeah.
That
got
almost
Outlaw
seems like
Star
the
over
most
there
likely
now,
thing
too.
they would go for.
And Trigon.
And both of those do have pretty nice HD remasters.
Yeah.
And again.
And My Hero Academia would be
I mean,
good. But again, also a good candidate for WoW.
Yeah.
Well.
And getting on Crave.
WoW seems like a better place to put, like, My Hero Academia, Naruto, Dragon Ball.
If it ends up being in households, but that's our 5 minutes.
Yeah. I will, one more thing, Dragon Ball Super.
Yes.
Again, another thing that would be good on WoW, but if it were on Adult Swim Canada, that's like the one anime that I would expect they would also put on other Corus networks as well. Like I could totally see Dragon Ball Super if they got it for Adult Swim, like giving it a Teletoon run too.
Yeah. Cross promotion, get people watching.
Anyway, that's our baseless speculation, and that wraps us up for today. Thanks guys for coming on. Where can people find you guys online?
You can find me on Twitter at Sketch1984. You can listen to the Toonami Faithful Podcast at soundcloud.com/Toonami Faithful Podcast, and check out the website ToonamiFaithful.com.
And you can find me on Twitter at Karl R. Olson. That's KarlRolson. Same for Facebook, and you can also find my music at ultraclastron.com. I don't feel like spelling it, just guess.
It will be in the description on this episode. Karl, of course, does the theme song for this show. That you can find that on his album Packet Flood at all the places he listed. Thanks for tuning in to Zon in Canada. You can find and stream it. You can find me on Twitter at jbetteridge or email zonincanada@gmail.com. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music. I guess I should get on Spotify at some point, but I'm not there yet. Maybe I should work on that. But your other
We're on
podcast
Spotify.
app of choice. Yeah, I need to talk to you about that, actually.
You need to talk to Paul about that, because I have no idea how we made that happen.
Yeah. But you can find me there, and recommend the show to anyone you think may like it, because I'd appreciate that. Thanks everyone for listening. See you again.
Bye everybody.